In the entirety of football history, there have only been 25 players to ever win the Champions League with 2 different clubs. But of those 25, even fewer have won it, while being one of, if not the most important players on their squad. And among the select few to do so was no other than Deco, one of the most underappreciated and underrated players of his generation. A generation that was absolutely stacked with world-class talent from every single position, spread throughout every single league. Deco was so good he would help carry an incredibly weak underdog squad all the way to Champions League glory, mentored a young Xavi, and even kept Andres Iniesta on the bench due to just how incredible of a player he was. But unfortunately, despite the brilliance and magic, Deco completely lacked discipline, and it could have been even greater. Because as class as he was on the pitch, Deco was always notoriously known as a player who would never take training seriously and would even come to training drunk in the height of his career. So today, I feel like it's my duty to show and remind you all just how good Deco truly was, and show how his disruptive behavior spiraled him downhill, which prevented him from playing at the highest level for a much longer time. While many might remember Deco as a Portuguese footballer, he's actually Brazilian, born and raised in São Bernardo do Campo, Brazil. But the odd thing about Deco was, despite his insane prodigious talent that was recognized at a professional level since he was 15, the lively youngster was infamous for his relaxed attitude, always smiling, laughing, and playing around on the pitch. So much so that he would be nicknamed De from the De in his first name, Anderson, which also meant talkative or chattering. And this couldn't have fit his carefree personality more, because as carefree as he was, it also translated into how creative and unorthodox his playstyle was on the pitch. He would only play a total of 2 matches after moving up to the senior team of his childhood club, Corinthians, before he would get scouted by Portuguese legend Tony to move and play for historic Portuguese side, Benfica, as he would see the insane raw talent that the young Deco had. But due to his inexperience and young age, Benfica would loan him out to get more playtime and experience to their development or farm team, Alverca. And Deco would be so good that he would impress everyone who watched, as they would see a kid who was basically toying with grown men, scoring 13 goals in 30 matches as a playmaking midfielder, actually helping this historically weak club be promoted all the way to the First Division Primeira Liga. Then after a single-year loan with the club, Deco would go back to Benfica only to be traded away by their new manager. Thus, Benfica would make one of the biggest blunders in their club history by sending him away. As fate would have it, their bitter rivals FC Porto would eventually take this opportunity to sign the young and wild playmaker. And it was in Porto that Deco would truly shine and blossom into an absolutely world-class player, because with Porto, Deco would be given the green light to play however he wanted. And this freedom to play in his style of football would quickly help him to blossom into one of the best midfielders in the league. At the heart of Deco's game was his absolutely magical vision and creative playmaking. His passes were almost wild and seemed crazy to pull off. Especially in his younger years, it looked like madness, until the moment he would reach his target that most defenders didn't even think would be able to make it. He would constantly scan the field for openings no matter how narrow they would be, and would often give the ball to his teammates not where they wanted it, but instead where he wanted them to go. Deco's passing was so unorthodox and wild that you would sometimes question just how he was able to rip through the opposition defense. But probably the most impressive thing about his playmaking was his insane passing range. Deco could spray long, accurate passes across the pitch with pinpoint precision, or thread a perfectly weighted ball through several opposition players. But for his long balls especially, they weren't slow and traveled the entire pitch like, say, Xabi Alonso's long passes. But instead, he would hit them a lot lower with incredible power and thread the most surprising passes that would even catch his own teammates off guard. Especially from crossing the ball inside, I'd say he's even more superior than Xavi in how he knew how to get the ball into the perfect spot from either side. And in my opinion, the coolest thing about Deco was he simply didn't care if his pass was risky or not. He would try it anyways. And for him, more often than not, it would work. He was truly as aggressive of a playmaker as you could think of. Plus, the man was also an incredibly accurate free kick taker. And then you have his Brazilian flair come into play. Though far from the fastest of players, Deco's touch and dribbling flair was truly captivating. Sure, he wouldn't do crazy things like Ronaldo or Ronaldinho stepovers, but you'd almost be surprised to see a guy with his build and speed being able to navigate through the tightest of spaces or dancing with the ball. And he had surprisingly elite balance with his ball handling, but it was his composure under pressure that really helped him thrive in high-stakes situations. It's kind of weird because it looks like he's struggling, but all of a sudden he'll do something that completely catches the opposition off guard, or deliver an incredible pass that leaves his defenders confused. And in just a year with Porto, Deco would already play a huge role into helping the club who had just signed him halfway towards the previous season, with a back-to-back Portuguese Cup and a single Portuguese Super Cup trophy. But still, the club would continuously finish just shy of winning the Primeira Liga title. However, Deco would only improve his game and become even more elite season after season, because in 2002, with Jose Mourinho being appointed as manager, he would help light up the fire inside the usually carefree Deco, which truly turned him into one of the best midfielders in the world. He would go on to score 12 goals and provide an insane 30 assists in 45 matches to finally help his club Porto lift the Primeira Liga title. Because even though he technically won it in his first season with the club, he didn't nearly have an impact as the most important player on the squad. Deco would also start the season winning his third Portuguese Super Cup and play a huge role in helping Porto win the UEFA Cup, or today's Europa League trophy, bringing his club 3 pieces of silverware in a single season. And now it was undeniable that at 25 and a half years old, Deco was already right up there with the best midfielders in the world. Any player you could think of at the time, Deco would be right up there in terms of quality, skill, and respect. Because in the following 2003-2004 season, Deco would begin this iconic year with his second ever Portuguese Super Cup win, even extending on to win back-to-back Primeira Liga titles with another monstrous playmaking run, providing a total of 29 assists that season. And while they would finish as runner-ups in the Portugal Cup and the UEFA Super Cup, that didn't really matter, as Deco and Porto would do the impossible as the absolute underdogs of the tournament, leading his team all the way to the Champions League final, where many pundits doubted that a very underwhelming Porto side could win it all. Deco would play an absolute masterclass in the Champions League final against Monaco, lifting the coveted trophy while winning the Champions League final man of the match and being the tournament's top assist provider. All this while also suffering the most fouls in the entire campaign. Deco was just absolutely magical, also being named the UEFA Footballer of the Year and the UEFA Midfielder of the Year, while domestically in Portugal he would be named the Portuguese Footballer of the Year, and to top it all off would finish second in Ballon d'Or voting, just under Andres Iniesta and above Ronaldinho, which I think if Pavel Nedved had won a year before, Deco definitely should have won the award. But again, the voting and criteria is just never consistent. But regardless, these past 2 seasons proved that Deco was indeed the best midfielder in the world at the time. Deco was so brilliant that every club in the world wanted him. He was only 27 years old and was in his absolute prime. But his next destination would be no other than the country right next to him, that conveniently had the same weather he loved in Portugal and just happened to have one of the best nightlifes in the world, Barcelona. His arrival at the Catalan club signaled the beginning of a partnership that would go on to define Barcelona's midfield for years to come. Playing alongside Ronaldinho, Deco formed a midfield duo that was nothing short of sensational. The two, along with a younger Xavi, would just dominate the midfield, and Ronaldinho and Deco, especially with their Brazilian origins, would just start to actually play around during matches and just completely toy with the opposition. Many times just going back and forth and just passing in circles even. It was just too easy for them, helping Barcelona win the La Liga title for the first time in 5 years. Because you have to remember, Barca was in serious decline, with this season being the true start of the rise into one of the most successful clubs of the late 2000s and early 2010s. And without a doubt, Deco was a huge factor in that revival, being named the back-to-back UEFA Midfielder of the Year for the second time in his career. It all off with his second Champions League trophy. Barca had nearly completed the treble and were on top of the world. By this time, the young Xavi and Iniesta had really began to improve as well, and Deco had undoubtedly played a huge factor in their development, as they would learn a lot from the carefree maestro. However, it was this success and glory so early into his career at Barca that left Deco with a sense of completion, in which his passion and dedication to the game began to take a huge nosedive. Along with Ronaldinho, the Brazilian-born maestros would begin to take their already excessive partying to a whole nother level. I mean, these guys had basically won it all and just wanted to enjoy the final primes of their youth as ridiculously as possible. Deco and Ronaldinho's partying and drinking were the stuff of legends. It was even rumored that Deco had a clause in his contract that allowed him to drink and party not once but twice a week. This was unheard of in professional football, something that not even Ronaldinho had. There was even a story of how Deco turned an entire hotel floor into his private nightclub. He had famous DJs and transformed the hallways into a dance floor, inviting his friends, fellow football stars, and celebrities to come and join him. And his love for alcohol was notorious. There were times where he would even come to Barcelona training while drunk, and despite the scolding from training staff and managers, would still occasionally do it anyways. And he was a particularly bad influence to the younger members of Barcelona, like Giovanni dos Santos, who we all know would come to love alcohol and partying himself. This excessive behavior would eventually take a toll in his career, leading to discipline issues, clashing with managers, and a lack of fitness. It's easy to see how, with him and Ronaldinho absolutely overindulging in partying and alcohol, would affect the club's determination overall the next season, when Barcelona would only win a single Spanish Super Cup. But even despite the lack of fitness, Deco would still be good enough to win the 2006 FIFA Club World Cup Golden Ball. But the bad influence on team morale would only continue, with Barca failing to win a single piece of silverware in the 2007-2008 season. Because of Deco and Ronaldinho's continuously bad influence on the club, the front office had no choice but to completely overhaul the squad and remove the toxicity by transferring an incredible amount of players, including their partying goats, Ronaldinho and Deco, while bringing in Pep Guardiola for a change of locker room culture. But perhaps leaving the nightlife capital of Spain was a good change of pace for Deco, because in his brief time with Chelsea and laying off the partying and alcohol considerably, compared to his final years in Barcelona, Deco would start his time in England in great form, scoring some amazing goals and absolute screamers before getting injured. And when you look at how poorly he maintained his fitness after that Champions League win with Barca, and add in the fact that he was getting older around the age of 33, it was only natural that he would begin to slow down. But despite that, Deco managed to help Chelsea win 2 FA Cups and a single Premier League title in just 2 years, before he would go back to his native country of Brazil and play in the Brazilian League for Fluminense, where he would surprisingly manage to help them win 2 Brazilian League titles and a Campeonato Carioca in the later years of his career before finally retiring. It really makes you wonder just how greater he could have been and how many more trophies he could have won if he never let his fitness and dedication decline with the years of partying and alcoholism. Because at his best, Deco truly belonged up there with the greatest midfielders of his generation. Former Barca manager Frank Rijkaard once described Deco as the metronome of the midfield and the conductor of the orchestra, with Jose Mourinho calling him a maestro in the midfield of the park, a player who could dictate the tempo of a match like no other. And even Sir Alex Ferguson once said watching Deco, he has a rare gift of making the most difficult and wild passes on the pitch look easy. And now in 2023, Deco works as the sporting director of FC Barcelona, where he has heavily cut down on alcohol and has worked more into staying fit at a later age. But it's no doubt that his incredible playstyle and lifestyle would leave a lasting mark on the beautiful game. He wasn't just a midfielder, he was a magician who would try things that most midfielders would never dare, achieving football glory and respect from the greatest of his generation. Because Deco is nothing short of extraordinarily world class.